Let's go ahead and get started. We'll pray and then we'll get started. Continuing in chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes. Lord, thank you again for just who you are. Thank you for your grace and your wisdom. I pray, Lord, that this would be encouraging and instructive, that we would not be distracted by the things of the day, Lord, but that we would take time to focus on your word and what you have for us, Lord, regarding Koheleth observation using your wisdom. We thank you again just for everything you do for us. Pray, God, that you would be glorified. For it's in your Son's name. Amen. Amen. Okay. Hope everyone had a good week. Let's go ahead and continue our discourse into Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 11. And we'll start by reviewing what we talked about last week concerning this topic. So we looked at verses from 1 to 11a, and we talked about that Solomon is looking at essentially the activities of humanity. Now, I noted last week that it's important that when we look at this chapter, one of the difficulties is as we look at it, making value judgments on the activities that Solomon is addressing. And it's important that we look at it from the perspective of Solomon himself. Solomon, when he's detailing these events or these activities of humanity, that he is not making value judgments. That will come later, okay? But for right now, he's just listing all of the activities that he observes on the land or under the sun regarding the interactions of man. So in this statement concerning the activity of humanity and how the activity of humanity on this land is fixed, it must be noted that Koheleth is not making value judgments based upon the activity of humanity, nor is he promoting that God approves of these activities. That's also important too. He's just looking at what people are doing, right? And making notations here. He is merely observing these events from an unbiased view, okay? Like a researcher. We talked about this, right? That Ecclesiastes is the research book of the scriptures, right? Koheleth is observing the activities of humanity and making some observations and comparing those observations to the wisdom of God, okay? This statement by Koheleth underscores all the activities that are done under heaven from the perspective of what God has prescribed for humankind that is appropriate or beautiful. We ended on that verse, chapter 3, verse 11, that he's made everything appropriate in its time, right? I kind of think of this particular observation as an ocean liner, okay? Consider the ship itself and the boundaries of the ship reality, right? And on that ship, there are lots of activities that you can do, right? You can go, for a walk on the deck. You can, go and eat at one of the restaurants. You can sit out on the deck and, get tanned. Right? You can go to an exercise class. Some ocean liners even have roller coasters. That's amazing, right? You can't do any of those activities are fixed. You can't do anything else outside of this ship. If you try to do an activity outside the ship, you'll end up in the water, right? That's kind of the idea, right? You can also pull the fire alarms if you want, right? Now, I would not suggest that, but you could do that if you wanted to. Right? You can harass individuals on this ship. And all the activities that take place on this vessel, right? You have no control on where the vessel goes. Okay? You cannot, you can't decide that you want to take this ship and put it somewhere else on a different destination. That destination is fixed. And even so, all of the things that occur on this vessel are the activities of what is prescribed here on this ship. That's kind of the same thing here. That the activities of humanity are here. They are nowhere else. And there's many things that an individual can do with his time, right? Okay, now that we've kind of set this up, I will use this particular image to begin to start to address the rest of what Koheleth talks about in Ecclesiastes 3. Let's go ahead and look at the second half of verse 11b in this text. It says, he has also set eternity in the heart of man, so that man will not find out the work which God has done from beginning even to the end. Let's take a look at these three words highlighted in red, and if you have notes, they are also on your notes as well. Natan is the Hebrew word here. This word is a verb, and it's used frequently, and it is translated to give, set, to put, or deliver. So to hand someone something, to deliver something to someone, to put something in its proper place, or to set or establish something. Okay? Natan. This word is used 25 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. As a matter of fact, we've kind of already saw this particular word before in various passages and chapters that we've looked at so far in Ecclesiastes. Let's take a look at some ways that it's used in the book of Ecclesiastes. We'll start in chapter 1, verse 13. Concerning Koheleth's objective of his activity to start with. In verse 13, he says this, I, the preacher, this is verse 12, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. Koheleth uses this word to talk about his focus, right? That he sets his mind. He's purposeful in that regard. He establishes it. It is fixed. In verse 17 of chapter 1, again, same word here, he uses, and same quote, that he says, I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and realize that this is also is striving after wind. Right? Again, this statement, again, setting his mind not only to know the activities that are done under the sun by the wisdom of God, but also seeking to know wisdom and madness itself. We talked about this when we looked at chapter 1. In chapter 2, Natan is used as well. In chapter 2, verse 21, he writes this, when there is a man who has labored with wisdom and knowledge and skill or ability, then he gives or he establishes his legacy to the one who has not labored with him. Remember, we talked about this, that he brings out this point that it is useless to establish a legacy or a share, right? Because you're not going to be there to guide and instruct a person to see whether or not they're going to use what you passed on to them wisely, right? You're kind of left at the mercy of their own wisdom if they're going to choose to use it, and you don't have any control over that, right? In verse 26 of chapter 2, this word Natan is used, okay? It says, for a person who is good in his sight, he is given wisdom, knowledge, and joy, while to the sinner he is given the task of gathering and collecting so that he may give to the one who is good in God's sight. We talked about this, right? That this has to do with the previous economy and how it works. That a person who fears God in his sight is given wisdom and knowledge, and to the sinner, which is an adjective, it's a descriptor of a particular person. That is a person who does not fear God. God has given them the work to gather and collect to give to the one who fears him. Okay? Again, this is not within this particular economy or this particular administration, but this is something that was former. In chapter 3, verse 10, it is also used here. Solomon, again, our Koheleth, outlining, I've seen the task which God has given the sons of men to occupy themselves. He has established or has set this for men to complete. Okay? So this word is used, it's used to set something or to deliver something, as in delivering like a letter or delivering a message or something like that. And it is also used to set or to place. This word Natan is in the qual stem. It is active. That means the participant is doing this. God himself has set this. And this word is in the katal, the perfect. It is complete. Okay? So God has set what in the heart of man? Koheleth mentions this particular quality, that he has set or established or put eternity in their heart. What is this word? What does this mean? That he has set or put eternity in their heart. This word eternity is the Hebrew word olam. Olam is an interesting word. 438 times it appears in the Hebrew scriptures. 7 times this word appears in the book of Ecclesiastes. I almost said book of Revelation. I'm still on that. We're away from that. Okay. The word olam is interesting. It can be translated various ways. Forever, eternity, right? It's sometimes, some places it's translated age, okay, which I think is kind of overcooking the word itself. The word speaks of an unlimited duration of time, okay? You can't measure it, or even elongated measure of time in the past. For instance, some of the places that it's used, it's translated ancient, okay? Like the ancient one or ancient documents. The word olam is used too, okay? As a matter of fact, we've seen this word as well in the book of Ecclesiastes. We have not focused on this word in past lessons, but we have grazed past it. For example, in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 4, Koheleth uses this to discuss the nature and the substance of the earth or the land. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth or the land remains forever. The land will remain forever. Okay? This earth will remain always. Okay? And Solomon again compares and contrasts the longevity of the earth to longevity of generations, right? That we will, given enough time, we all will pass away, but the earth will still continue to be here. The land will still continue to be here, right? People will live in houses that we lived in, or maybe build on places that we built and establish things that we've, when we're long gone, right? Verse 10 of chapter 1 also uses this concerning the activities of humanity. Is there anything of which one might say, see, it is new and improved? He says already it has existed for eternity, for ages, which were before us. There is nothing new, right? It's just has a different veneer, different spin. In chapter 2, verse 16, the word olam is used. Let's start at verse 15, and then we'll look at verse 16 of chapter 2. Verse 15, then I said to myself, as the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity, verse 16, For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool. Inasmuch as the coming days all will be forgotten, and how the wise man and the fool alike die. There's no eternal or longevity of time of remembrance for the wise man as with the fool. Koheleth lamenting that really, in reality, the fool and the wise man die just the same. And that over time, they may not even be remembered. So the word olam means a long period of time, seemingly is translated forever or an age or ancient, depending on the context of the passage here. Remember the word heart. I will continue to drive this point home. The word heart is not material. It's not talking about the muscle that resides within the center of our chest. No, the heart, in terms of the Hebrews, how the Hebrews would understand it, is immaterial. It is the mind. It is the place of thinking and understanding and comprehension. He's also set eternity within the heart of humanity. Okay? So what does this mean? Very simply, that Koheleth has told the congregation of Israel that God has placed the concept or the idea of an extended time in the mind of men. That humanity has always thought about time and events within that time. I mean, think about this. How many discussions have we had where I just don't have a lot of time? Or, my goodness gracious, what's going to happen after I pass away? What does all this activity mean in light of how I live? Among all the activities that humanity engages in, if God has placed it there, which Koheleth says this is the most important thing that God desires that humanity understand. This is important. Let's continue with verse 11. For he has set eternity in their hearts, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. Now I have to be honest with you. When I first began to opine this text, I kind of scratched my head and I said, what does this even mean? I have no idea what this means. I will try my best to explain this after going about a couple of hours trying to look at things to try to understand this and get clarity about this statement. This is rather unusual for me. So let's see what we can find here. Let's look at the phrase, yet so that. That's kind of throwing me off here. Yet so that is the word belay. That sounds like some type of modern day company or something. Belay, it's like, some type of modern, millennial, group or something like that. Maybe it's a coffee company or a tea company or something. This word occurs 58 times in the Hebrew text, and it only occurs once in the book of Ecclesiastes. That is here. Now, what's interesting about this particular word here, belay, is it's yet so that it's translated. However, the word itself means either a wearing out or without, no or not. So why is it translated yet so that? The word itself, belay, even gets more kind of fuzzy, kind of more fuzzy as you look at the word itself, as it's translated in English from the Hebrew text. The word belay can either be used as a substantive, which is a word or word that acts like a noun in a sentence. We'll talk about that in a minute, okay? Or what we call an adverb of negation, okay? It works alongside of the verb as a negation. Let's take a look at some examples. Let's look at the substantive first, okay? We find this in, I believe this is Isaiah. I forgot to put the reference there, so I apologize. It says here, "O Lord, by these things men live, and in all these is life of my spirit. O restore me to health and let me live. Lo, for my own welfare I had great bitterness. It is you who has kept my soul from the pit of nothingness." That word there is belay. It is being used as a noun. Okay? The pit of nothingness, the pit of without. Some translations, I believe the KJV uses corruption. Okay? But the word is literally without, no, not, or wearing out of something, right? Deuteronomy uses this word too, but it's translated as a conjunction. It's really kind of interesting. In Deuteronomy chapter 9, verses 25 to 28, it's written as such this: "So I fell down before the Lord 40 days and 40 nights, which I did, because the Lord had said he would destroy you." This is Moses talking to the nation of Israel, the second generation. "I prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord God, do not destroy your people, even your inheritance, whom you have redeemed through your greatness, whom you have brought out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not look at the stubbornness of this people, or at their wickedness because of their sin. Otherwise, the land from which you brought us out, they may say, because the Lord was not able to bring them into the land which he had promised them, and because he hated them, he has brought them out to slay them in the wilderness." You can translate that word without. You may say, without the Lord was not able to bring them out. Of course, that would be weird, right, to do. Or was it not the Lord was able to bring them out into the land? That word is translated this way to bring clarity to what Moses was saying. But the word is belay. In 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, the same word is translated as a conjunction here, which again is kind of odd because that's not what the word is. The word means without, or not, or no, right? And again, this is translated as a conjunction to bring clarity to the text here. "Now Moab rebelled against Israel in the death of Ahab, and Uzziah fell through the lattice in his upper chamber, which was in Samaria, and became ill. So he sent messengers and said to them, Go acquire Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, whether I will recover from this sickness." Of course, that's not a good thing to do, to appeal to a false deity. But the angel of the Lord said to Elijah the Tishbite, "Arise and go up to meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and say to them, Is it because there is no God in Israel? Or is it without? Or is it except? Or is it not? There is no God in Israel that you're going to acquire Beelzebub." It's almost like Elijah saying, you couldn't go to anyone else? Like, you can come to me? You're going to that false deity? How stupid is that, right? And of course, the Lord goes on to basically judge him. Isaiah 5:13 uses the word belay. Okay. It says, "Therefore my people go into exile for their without of knowledge," or their no of knowledge, their lack of it. They have no knowledge. "And their honorable men are famished, and their multitude is parched with thirst." Isaiah judging the nation of Israel due to their not acknowledging God as the means of the old covenant, right? The law of Moses. Lack of knowledge doesn't just mean, they don't know how to add and subtract. It's that they have no knowledge. They've gone away from the law that Moses gave them, and as a result, they will face judgment for it. So I will try my best to retranslate this, to try to bring clarity here. It says he's also set eternity in their heart or their mind, the area of thinking, without which man will not find out the work which God has done from beginning to even to the end. I will bring up one point about the word work, and then I will come to a conclusion on a whole about what I think this verse that Koheleth is saying means. Okay? The word in Hebrew for work is ma'aseh. Okay, again, which is used in the book of Ecclesiastes 21 times. It refers to the work or activity of human beings and or God. So whatever work or activity that man or God engages in, that is ma'as. We talked about this word before. It has shown up in chapter 1. We looked at it many times. Here's what I think Koheleth is talking about. Okay? In terms of chapter 3, this is what I would call Koheleth's sine qua non. We've used this term before. The essential component or ingredient of the statement in this chapter. Koheleth has told the congregation of Israel the purpose of why God has placed eternity in the minds of humanity, why we think about these things, with the sole purpose that humanity will not know all the ends of God's work. Think about this. Where will you be 10 years from now? You don't know. And neither do I. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. We know we'll be doing events. We will be doing activity, but we don't know what activity we'll be doing. But we may explore and ponder the work of God from beginning to end. How many times have we heard this? I don't know where I'm going, but I hope that we go there. I hope that we do this. We're preparing for this. We have no clue where we will be or what we will be doing. We have no clue. And if we think that we do, we are acting outside of what God has done. For example, there's a similar statement. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. In the book of James, chapter 4, okay, James mentions this. He goes, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow, we will go to such and such a city. We'll spend a year there. We'll engage in business and we'll make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor." Doesn't that sound familiar? I think that James might be thinking about what Koheleth has been talking about. Your life is just a vapor that appears for a little while and vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. We do not know. God has placed eternity in the minds of men so that we will not find out what we will be doing 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Instead, because that knowledge isn't available to us, James gives the statement, hey, you should say this or think this way. If the Lord desires that we do this, then we should. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to go around praying and asking the Lord what his desire is. That's not the point here. The point is found in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 12 to 13. Instead of trying to figure it out, right, you should do this. Koheleth writes, I know that there's nothing better for them, that is the humanity, than to rejoice and do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all of his labor. It is the gift of God. Let's look at the word rejoice, because that is, again, an interesting word here. The Hebrew word is samach. Samach. It occurs 150 times in the Hebrew scriptures, 8 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. It literally means merry, cheerful, right? Happy or rejoicing. That is also how it's translated. When we talk about samach, we're not just talking about a smile on the face, although that is included. It's not just talking about, being jovial, which is also included there, but it's talking about a state of being, a favorable state of being. One's mind is engaged, one's thoughts are engaged, one's behavior is engaged. Samach, okay? It is a disposition or an outlook towards a person or an activity. Instead of figuring out where you'll be 10 years from now, enjoy the activities that you're doing now. Be pleased with that. That's what Koheleth says. He says, I know that there's nothing better than for them to rejoice and do good in one's lifetime. What a perception. Koheleth writes that because of this statement before, that is verse 11, A and B, that he has thorough knowledge and understanding. That word, I know. He has a thorough knowledge of this. He's not just conceptualizing or pontificating. He has a thorough understanding and knowledge of what he's talking about. I know that there's nothing better for them to rejoice and do good. Again, the word good is thob. Qualitatively good things. Good things from the outlook of how God sees them and what he has established, right? So murder isn't good, right? Obviously. He says, moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all of his labor. It is the gift of God. He has thorough knowledge and understanding that there is not anything more good, qualitatively, than to be in a favorable state of being, to rejoice and do things that are qualitatively good from the point of view of God in a person's life. I find this to be very fascinating, that every man who eats and drinks sees. That word is the word ra'ah. Remember, we talked about this word. It's not just looking at something and going, it's not just looking at something like seeing, but it's looking at it and inspecting it, evaluating it. So sees is they see that the good of labor is that they're able to eat and drink, which is the gift of God in all of their activity. We ought to be concerned about the future that God has revealed. We don't know our own personal future, but we're not to be concerned about that. We are to be concerned about our activity today and whether or not our activity is qualitatively good. Luther, what's an example? Loving your missus if you're married. That's qualitatively good. If you have a child, training and instructing your child, that's qualitatively good. Being a good friend, being a good neighbor, being a good employee. Those are things that are qualitatively good in the sight of God. Why? Because he's prescribed them to man to keep him occupied. Koheleth's thought concerning the activity of humanity is to have a favorable state about their activity and to do things that are good from the perspective of God. And that those who are sustained physically by this labor ought to see this is what God has given humanity freely to do, and to recognize that God has given this labor for humanity. What did God do when he made male and female? He gave them labor, things to do, to care for the animal, to tend the garden. That reality hasn't changed. There's many things that we are to do, to be engaged in. And from the perspective of God, they are all worthwhile. They keep us occupied. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 14. We will continue. I know that everything that God does will remain forever. There is nothing that to add to it, and there's nothing to take from it. Isn't that interesting? Olam, again, is found in this word, but let's take a look at the word hayah. Hayah is a verb in the Hebrew scriptures. It occurs 47 times, and it means to be or to exist, okay? To come to pass. Okay? Now, this word, again, is written in a pretty interesting, in an interesting way. It is the yictol, or the imperfect, okay? The yictol. So we got the katal, which is the perfect, and the yictol, which is the imperfect. What is this? Well, first of all, when a Hebrew word is written in this manner, that is the yictol, it is either continuous, incomplete, or open-ended by the subject. Okay? So it's either continuous, or it is incomplete, it's not finished, or it's open-ended, right? This act, that is when the yictol is used, is usually seen or is observed as a continual process by the subject itself. Okay? And when one writes in this manner, it has more to do with how the action took place rather than when. So the when, that's really not really the focus of this. It's more how the action took place, right? So in terms of Koheleth writing this in this particular way, he's stating that everything that God does will continue or remain. 1,000 years will pass. Men will still be doing activity. That won't change. I would even say, even when we get to the age of ages, we will still be conducting activity. It may just be different, but we will still be engaged in activity. This will not change. Koheleth's statement speaks to the permanency of the work of God. And in a broader context, this is speaking about the activity of humanity. There is no conclusion or limit to how God has established that humanity ought to conduct itself on the land. There's no conclusion, no end to this. Whatever God establishes remains forever. If we have been created and God has given us a place to conduct this activity, this will continue. It will always be this way. Which should comfort us, really, to some degree. I will expound on that in a few minutes. I know that everything that God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it, or nothing to take away from it. In other words, Koheleth is stating that there's no better way to live. No activities of humanity can add or subtract that would make God's activity considering humanity better or more profitable than what he's established. You can't add, he's given us all the ingredients, and it's kind of like, well, maybe if I put more salt in it, this would be more profitable. He's already given us all the ingredients. He's given us all the activities that we ought to do. We cannot add to it, and we can't take away anything from what he's given to us. That's what Koheleth is talking about. He is established in how they ought to live and the outlook of the activities they ought to have and perform. And then we get to the coup de grace in verse 14. For God has so worked that men should fear him. That's the objective. Koheleth told the congregation of Israel the purpose of the activities of God concerning humanity, that God in his activity was as such that men would fear or acknowledge his face. The word for him is the word panim. We talked about this. This is the same word that's found in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 26, concerning the face or the sight of God. Every single activity that God has prescribed for men has the objective that men would acknowledge him. That's the point. So tying all this up in a big bow, what do we got? God has created reality like the vessel, and has prescribed activities for humanity to do and to complete. We have the responsibility of doing those things or not. If a person observes this activity as a means to an end of themselves, this is irrational and unreasonable thinking. If you're laboring to labor, you're doing it wrong. If you're laboring to build a legacy, you're doing it wrong. If you're laboring to think that you're going to pass on your things to your kids in hopes that they would be wise with what you give them, that's nice, but you're doing it wrong. If you're doing your labor to be remembered, you're doing it wrong. It is irrational and unreasonable to think this. God has placed the thought of time in the mind of humanity so that they will ask questions and explore and ponder the work of God from start to finish, in addition to understanding that we don't know all the ends. We can ponder it, but at the end of the day, it's all speculative. We do not know personally what activities we will be involved in tomorrow or next week or next month. We plan, we make plans, but those plans may change. All the works of humanity, including the deeds that he has given for humanity to live, are to be seen considering the source, that God has given all this labor for us to do. That a person's outlook ought to be favorable toward activity, because this is what God observes as good. This is what gives physical substance for them. And this is what humanity receives from God. And that in the end, all of the benefits humanity receives ultimately point back to the objective, that humanity ought to acknowledge that the Creator has given them everything. Will had said something a week ago. Instead of focusing on what you don't have, be thankful for what you do have. Instead of focusing on how poor this is, focus on how the means by which you're doing this provides for XYZ, right? It's kind of the same idea, that we get to do all these things, and these are things that God has prescribed for us. Koheleth seems to be touching on the following, couple more slides, and then I'll end here. If a person takes God out of labor and activity, life becomes random instead of fixed. God wants me to love my missus because that's what he has prescribed for a relationship like that. And for me not to acknowledge that is for me to miss it. Life is not random. These events that we do in the sight of God are not random, they are given to us. That the quality of good becomes subjective and quantitative rather than objective and qualitative. I do these things because God has prescribed them for me to live and know how I ought to live. That's the point. That activities without God become meaningless or pointless instead of meaningful and purposeful. That is the point too. If God is taken out of labor and activity, time becomes temporal and insignificant rather than intentional and meaningful. And lastly, a man's pleasure is the only objective if God is out of the picture, instead of a person's pleasure and recognition of who gives that pleasure to you. God wants us to be delighted, but he wants us to be delighted acknowledging him. That's the point. Oh boy, lots of details, but good ones nonetheless. I love this book. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we will close out our lesson for this week. Lord, thank you for giving us things to do, but not to be busybodies, but to be purposeful and mindful ones. Thank you for putting our outlook in its proper place, that the activities that we do are not purposeless, and that we are to be intentional in these activities, that we're not to worry about where we'll be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We can think about that for sure, but that's not where our focus ought to be. Our focus ought to be, what are we doing today that is meaningful with the activities that we have? That's the focus. May we continue to keep that. And may we continue, Lord, to live lives intentionally and purposefully on this land that you have given to us. We thank you so much, Lord, for it's in your Son's name. Amen.